This is update for July 19, 2023, day 511 of the war, and of the date update. This is also catch up for July 18. Uh, Today is going to be more focused on sort of military topics. So I'm going to cover economic developments in the next video. There's nothing earth-shattering, no sort of significant changes in what's going on in the macro economy around the world. So I'll keep it for Wednesday. First is sort of strategic developments around the world, and we're going to start with China and US. The news is that US is clearing up airfields on the Palau Islands. It's somewhere around here where I'm showing. It's about 900 kilometers west of Philippines. So again, as you can imagine, this is closer than Guam, so it's more convenient location. And obviously, it's small. And in the case of military conflict, U.S. will need a lot of call it islands, a lot of airfields and hop-off locations, because the amount of troops that needs to go through that is going to be tremendous. In case, obviously, hopefully, that's not going to happen, but otherwise, so everything is being prepared, as you can see, in terms of potential conflict there. Now let's switch actually to closer to Ukraine. This is actually basically electronic warfare equipment that's being now installed on Russian tanks. So it was taking off from Russian tank. What this is essentially it's a suppression for their radio signal for FPV drones. FPV drones is basically fast flying, kamikaze drones that usually have some kind of cumulative warhead to attack armored targets. Could also be high explosive one that's used against humans and sort of softer targets. But in this case, this is what's being found in the Russian tank. This is obviously new. It has holes. It's sort of not perfect, not great. There is vulnerabilities in this device. However, it's very clear that eventually, in the next iteration of this product, the vulnerabilities will be closed. So as you can see, Russia is not sitting idle in terms of protecting its armor against this tactical drone attacks. And partially it is successful. The actual equipment and product looks like it's actually coming from China, so it's not developed in Russia. It looks like it's actually Chinese product based on the information from what I've seen, so what I've heard so far. Then Russia actually started using cluster munitions in Ukraine as well. So if you remember Ukraine, now let's actually kind of switch to the map. Ukraine got this cluster munitions from the US. Actually, Russia has a lot of them too. So they actually started using them as well. Before that, they tried not to use them. But at this point, there's sort of everything is acceptable, unfortunately. Then going back a little bit to UAVs and general sort of strategic situation with UAVs on the front line. In my opinion, Ukraine lost its advantage in UAV warfare. And I'm talking mostly, I'm focused on battlefield. I'm not talking about, Russian attacks using this Iranian UAVs to attack Ukrainian energy infrastructure and military assets and so on. That's totally different story. I'm talking the ones that's being used on the front line. Ukraine used to lead probably till about end of 2022, maybe sometimes through the winter, but past 3-4 months as Ukraine clearly lost its advantage. And Russia is definitely leading in this respect, and you probably have seen, they built one manufacturing facility to assemble those UAVs, and there's another one under construction. So basically, Russia is definitely closed the gap, and actually at this point ahead of Ukraine, and it really leads to quite significant losses in precious military equipment, specifically artillery pieces, also tanks, and so on. So because they used to target high value military assets, as you can imagine. So it really leads to significant losses. What I've been talking about, this Arlan 10, it's still not available in Ukraine. There's still no product that can be anywhere close to it. That's mass produced. That's organizationally properly organized. So Ukraine is getting more and more behind Russia in respect to the UAV warfare. There's still obviously at the at the very tactical level, Ukraine also has FPVs and the DJIs, hotels, all those tactical UAVs. But this is a result of help that Ukrainian army is receiving from basically volunteers, from citizens, from people outside of Ukraine donating money, and then the local units or local individual soldiers, they buy that. This is not sort of standard supply from Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, which is, as you can imagine, that's a result of absolute incompetence of the Ukrainian Minister of Defense, which definitely not in his right place. Shouldn't be there. And I mentioned there's a lot of allegations of him against him with respect to corruption, and but he's totally protected by the Ukrainian president, which kind of gives you also thoughts where the things are starting there. So as I said, this is another negative development for Ukraine in this respect. There is more sort of internal problems in Ukraine. So you probably heard about this Russian retaliation attacks against Odessa, Mykolaiv. So Odessa, Mykolaiv here, Chernomorsk. That's another town. This is all port towns and basically large outlets for Ukrainian exports to the world. So Russia was targeting port infrastructure, and they did quite a lot of damage to port infrastructure. So just one sort of private port, it's called Nicotera. That is the capacity there, throughput capacity is 4.5 million metric tons per year of grain and fertilizer. It was based on what I'm seeing is probably it's completely damaged, and don't know, very small fraction of capacity is available or left. And this is not the only port that was attacked. By the way, this Nicotera was owned by Russia. It was purchased by the Ukrainian oligarch who was financed by Russia. And that's actually another interesting topic, how Russia, before actually military aggression, how they were buying up assets in Ukraine. So what they used, they would create sort of out of blue local oligarchs by giving them loans. And in this case, the loan was from Gazprom Bank, which is the bank owned by Russian Gazproms, which is used to be largest, actually Russian state monopoly for export of natural gas to Europe and elsewhere in the world. So basically, this money were then recycled to buy up assets in Ukraine, and I'm sure around the world. I'm just speaking about Ukraine because I'm aware of this, how it's being done. And so they created this puppet oligarch out of blue and gave him loans, and then he would go and buy a lot of chemical assets, then also the ports and so on. So basically, he assembled quite significant, number of companies, and including actually titanium, uh, uh, titanium ore production, mines, and so on. So basically, a lot of strategic um, um, companies, because actually titanium ore then used in, if you you probably seen this multiple rocket launchers. So those rockets, a lot of them, they use uh, titanium as a component there. So it's critical, critical material uh, for those for manufacturing of those rockets. And Ukraine has large deposits of the titanium ore, and so Russia was basically in preparation of the war. As I said, the actual military conflict started well ahead of actual, shooting war. It usually starts with economic warfare. That's how it's being done. And if I draw an analogy, you would probably recognize China and how it's buying up all sort of assets around the world, natural resources, actually, including, I've heard that they're buying even in the US land and so on. So as you can see, this the first sign of the incoming war is really actually a economic war. It starts with economic war, and then eventually it goes into actual military conflict. So again, so Russia was attacking this, and going back to all of the ports, there is significant damage to Ukrainian infrastructure that's being used to transfer grain to the world market. And even at this point, even if Russia, let's say, decides to allow export of grain from Ukraine, the infrastructure is severely damaged. So the throughput probably, is not going to be is not going to be capable of, exporting what's available in Ukraine. And then there's all of this, suggestions. Let's export through, various countries and even Baltic Sea or elsewhere. And the whole problem with all of this is that mass does not work. So basically, the expenses, logistical expenses to bring to different ports are way too high. So then Ukrainian grain is way too expensive for the world market. Nobody wants to buy it, right? So this attack is really putting huge damage to Ukrainian economy. I would say potentially mortal blow, because the agriculture was last remaining generator of value add and sort of free cash flow for Ukraine as a country, and obviously for the government. And so this is very, very significant negative development. Ukrainian grain production was already down significantly from the last year. It was only, like, I think harvested was like 40 million tons versus typical 80. So it already went down like 2 times. Now it's probably going to be even less than that. Basically, there's will be barely anything for export. Essentially, just self-sufficient agriculture, which is Ukraine needs probably less than 20 million tons at this point. It's going to be totally devastating for the farmers, for the ordinary people on the ground. It's obviously not going to be felt immediately right now, but in sometime in the fall, this is going to be an extremely bad situation. The reason is just for those who don't know how the agriculture works. So, and this is actually very bad moment, because Ukraine started harvesting grains about, I would say, 3 weeks ago, plus minus, maybe 2 weeks ago, and already harvested like 1 million ton so far, something like that, maybe a little bit more. And so all of this grain now, this is new harvest, right? So new harvest is July through August, essentially, and some other crops that could be as late as September. but essentially most of it is July through August. And so all of this harvest that's being planted in the fall of 2022 and then spring of 2023 is basically bottlenecked. And this is obviously invested money by the farmers. So, and because effectively it cannot be exported, that's going to be huge loss and huge waste of resources for the farmers, which, as you can imagine, will probably lead to a lot of sort of bankruptcies and just general decline in economy as a whole. So again, this was extremely devastating blow for Ukraine. Last remaining sort of pillar of the economy is essentially being destroyed at this point. Another sort of negative that I would like to mention is about this attack, and this is actually, but the negative effect, the ramifications are actually kind of much worse. Is that basically screenshots from Ukrainian units, basically Ukrainian anti-air defense units. They have special software on the tablets or on computers that they use to track approaches of Russian UAVs and these missiles that attacking Ukraine, right? That were attacking, in this case, Odessa and so on. So basically, the screenshots were shared. So there is basically some Russian spies that take those screenshots and share it with the Russian side, and those screenshots basically floating on the Russian segment of internet, so you can see it for yourself that this is, classified information that shouldn't be, anywhere, but yet it is. Those screenshots are floating. You can, if you really try, you can find them on internet, on the Russian segment, as I said, of internet. This is really a big problem. This is, as you can imagine, that just tells you that basically Russian side is looking into Ukrainian anti-air defenses and being able to adjust their attacks essentially in real time, which makes this anti-air defenses, a lot less useful, a lot less effective than otherwise possible. So that's again a very big sort of concern, very big problem. I don't know how it's going to get resolved, and that's another big problem in Ukraine. There's a lot of Russian agents throughout, all this government apparatus in Ukraine, and including this Ukrainian equivalent of KGB, which is called SBU, and elsewhere as well. So as you can imagine, also in this anti-air defense systems. And by that anti-air defense systems, they also have all of this modern equipment from Germany, from Italy, France, from the US. So as you can imagine, this really is a big problem, as I said. On the positive side, Ukrainian forces managed to destroy the very large Russian ammunition depot in Crimea, which again is going to create significant problems, at least in short term, for the Russian side with ammunition. Definitely, it's not going to create total problem, but as a short term, that's very positive. It would have been extremely sort of positive if it were done in conjunction with the offensive, but as I said, the offensive is not happening, and in many ways it should not be happening because Ukrainian army is simply not capable of executing offensive operations at this moment, for the reason I discussed before. And then I want to touch a little bit on Wagner Group and give some information that they actually disclosed. So this is just statistics for those who are interested. So Wagner Group started its operations in Ukraine, participating in war against Ukraine. I guess that's the right way to say it. on March 19, 2022, and they stopped on May 20, 2023, because as everybody knows. So during that time, 78,000 people went uh, through Wagner Group as a whatever you call it, soldiers, or don't know whatever word you prefer to use, you can use it. I think it's doesn't really matter, or personal, I guess you can say. Out of that, 49,000 were former prisoners. So as you can see, only 29,000 are true volunteers, people who actually, not from the prisons. Out of 78,000, about 22,000 died in action during this time, which is like 14 months essentially. They lost, and then also they lost. Well, they didn't lose, but the wounded is 40,000. And at the end, on May 20th, they have in their units 25,000 mercenaries. I guess that's a way you can describe it that way, which also implies that out of that 40,000, at least, I don't know, like roughly 10,000 plus minus returned back to the units, or recovered, and about 30,000 sort of never returned. Maybe those people just, once the contract is over, many people choose not to continue because they were they sort of they are from jail, so they serve 6 months, and after that, they can go back to the normal life. In Then also, out of this 25,000, only 10,000 went to Belarus, which is where they are, most of them right now, and apparently 15,000 decided to sort of quit, or I wouldn't say totally quit, but decided not to sort of continue and kind of sit and wait and basically return to whatever civilian life they had. And then there was sort of a meeting of this 10,000 in Belarus with head of Wagner Group Prigozhin, and then actually military head, which is Utkin. And basically, the message is very clear: they will be back. They just waiting for the right moment, and the story of Wagner Group is not over. That's what I would say is very clear. They just waiting for the right moment. There is, as I discussed, there's a conflict with Russian Minister of Defense and his head of general staff, and so they won for now. But once the situation will get worse for the Russian political top, for the Russia on the front line, they will be back in need, and they will use that opportunity. So again, and then they probably, that 15,000 or majority of those probably will return. These soldiers are extremely motivated and extremely capable, I would say. So if they return, this is going to be a big problem for Ukraine down the road. Given especially that the quality of Ukrainian soldiers on the front line is going down, and very quickly, just naturally because of the attrition, as you can imagine. And even to the point that Ukrainian president signed the law that allows soldiers to become officers without any education or without anything, after being on the front line for 6 months. Obviously, this has to promotion has to come from the officers that are in charge of those soldiers, but effectively this shows tremendous stress on the human resources in Ukraine, and emerging problems with the officers, which is effectively backbone of the army. The way it's built for the Soviet army is definitely backbone. And this situation is going to get only worse. So normally, just for the reference, normally it's if you want to become an officer, it takes 4 years of education. In effectively, it's sort of basically like equivalent of university. So as you can imagine, giving this whole the attrition, and especially among the officers, is pretty high, and the junior officers, because this is obviously they're not going to become middle level or senior officers. They're just going to be junior officers, and that's really where the biggest attrition is. And this is sort of normal situation during the war, in any war. The same was in World War II, and don't know enough about World War One, but I'm pretty ready. I'm ready to bet that was a similar situation. Both, all of the sort of sides of the conflict. The biggest problem was the junior officers, because high loss level there. So again, Ukraine is definitely, I would say, there is very clear signs of emerging strategic problems for Ukraine. They are not sort of immediate. They're not happening in 2, 3, 4 months. But let's say in 6 months, this is going to be a clearly big problem, and after 6 months, the probabilities just goes up exponentially. Russia, obviously, as I mentioned before, is in better situation just because they have at least 4 times more population. At this point, probably I can clearly say it's more like 5 times. So there is a huge, tremendous advantage, and that's a whole problem, whole situation with Ukraine, and how its leadership is waging this war, this defensive war. Is that it's not done, properly, and the exchange is happening plus minus 1 for 1 with the Russian side, and that's really leads to eventual strategic defeat. And the number of weapons that's coming from the West is definitely not compensating the incompetence of the Ukrainian military and political top, and that's the whole kind of like summary of this whole situation right now in Ukraine. Now let's actually switch. Let's switch to frontline. I'm gonna do quick walkthrough, uh, doing a clockwise fashion as I always do. So the situation along the state border remains more or less the same. Is basically, I would describe it now, that guerrilla warfare is more or less permanent on both sides. So I mentioned that Ukrainian groups attacked ambushed Russian troops on the Russian territory. Similar things are happening from the Russian side. This commander groups, they're getting into Ukrainian territory and actually kill civilians several days ago. So basically, it's pretty ugly, I would say. It gets into the sort of ugly side of it, not just artillery shelling and and UAVs and missiles, but it's just becoming sort of expanding in terms of the depths of the warfare. Now let's jump to the North Luhansk front line. Things here are more or less stable, just tactical attacks. As I mentioned before, several days ago, Russian side managed to capture basically a tiny village that adjacent to this village, Kuzamivka. Again, it was not any major offensive, just weakness in Ukrainian defenses. That's all it is. There's on the tactical level. But as I said, there is no major Russian offensive here, even though some of the media outlets are reporting as if this is the beginning of some kind of major offensive here. And I would say that the Russian side does have about 100,000, maybe up to 150,000 of troops that are available for offensive. But my take on this is that they hope that Ukrainian command will exhaust its offensive resources, and then they will do counter-offensive, counterattack. But I don't think that they're gonna preemptively commit that 100 to 150,000 reserve that they built up so far. Now let's move to the North Donbass front line. Things here are also relatively quiet. Tactical skirmishes. The only place where there is some action is essentially south of Bakhmut, where Ukrainian side is actively pushing, and it's really thanks to this Azov. Effectively, that's the only sort of unit in Ukrainian army that's actively sort of trying to attack Russian side. They're trying to liberate this village Klishivka. They captured a lot of significant heights around it, which makes it super difficult for the Russian side to hold on to Klishivka. So my take on this, and probably in whatever week or 10 days, unless the Ukrainian side will gain control of Klishivka. Again, as I said before, it's not a major offensive. Again, this is all tactical fighting essentially at this point here. Now let's move to the central Donbass front line. Things here also more or less the same. A little bit quieter, as you can see, only attack from Peski salient and this attacks around Marinka, but otherwise it's just fairly quiet. And again, no advances for the Russian side there. Now let's move to the Zaporizhya front line. Things here are more or less quiet, just tactical skirmishes, but no major pushes, no new updates for this Staromlinivka, where, as I said, Ukrainian troops managed to actually get into the village, but were pushed out by Russian counterattack. So pretty sure there will be another try, and eventually Ukrainian forces will liberate this village, and there will be Orozhaine will, as I said, will come together. So it'll be just two villages. Again, nothing major here in this case. It's totally squeezing, tactical squeeze. This is, I wouldn't even call it offensive. The whole actually, this is something I would like to add, that this so-called offensive is really not an offensive. It's just several attacks, large tactical attacks that were essentially poorly coordinated, poorly organized, and you really cannot even call it technically offensive from just purely from military perspective. That, yes, the term is being used for propaganda purposes, but if you really analyze it from a factual perspective, what it was, you cannot even call it offensive, really. Now let's move to this, the last section of the front line along Dnipro River. Things here are quiet, no Russian attacks, no Ukrainian attempts to expand the bridgehead. So that's all for today. Thanks for watching, and till next time. Bye bye.